Good morning everyone. I've been playing around recently with a Ruby library called specquel. It's quite powerful. It's a bit like Active Record, but you can do way more things with it. It's potentially a bit faster. I don't know about that. I've not really done any tests, but I suspect it might actually be a bit faster. So today I decided to create a little library so that when you import it you will have an instance of RSpec, or you'll have an instance of your of SQL in your RSpec tests. So let's jump right into it. Right, so we're going to create this little gem. Using the bundle gem command, so -coc is code of conduct, so that just generates a file with some guidelines on how to contribute, with some defaults, some sensible defaults. -mit, that's going to be the type of license. --test is to specify the testing framework you're going to use, so that's just going to generate the scaffold, and the spec folder is the spec helper. -ci to generate a default YAML file to run the specs on GitHub Actions, and specquel is going to be the name of the gem. specquel, RSpec, SQL. I did like a mumble jumble of the two names. So let's run this command. Let's open the specquel folder. When you generate a new gem, there's a few things you need to fix in the gem spec. I'm going to show you. So you see there's a bunch of to-dos here. So if we run bundle install, it's actually going to complain. There's a metadata homepage URI that's invalid. It's got a to-do. So basically we need to fix all of the to-dos. And so that's going to be stupid code factory, which is my GitHub handle, then my email, and then description, which is going to be an RSpec extension for SQL. Basically going to be copying this as well. What's it gonna be? What's a good description? A drop-in gem to access a SQL connection in your RSpec test suite, RSpec test suite, yeah, sounds good. Homepage, that's going to be https://github.com, and the stupid code factory, and then specquel. Right, the license, I'm just going to cover this out for now, and usually what I do, I put those to the home page, because if there are ever, well basically the home page is the source code URI, and the changelog URI is gonna be there, if I ever make one, which I don't know about that. Cool, so let's run bundle install that we have this. So as you can see, it succeeded. Let's add some dependency. So we're gonna depend on RSpec. No version. We are going to. Well, actually, let's do this later. Let's go. So run bundle install. Let's go full TDD mode. As always. Right. Let's go to the spec helper, spec folder, and it's generated a specquel spec for us. And as you can see, everything runs fine. There's a failing test because this one's actually failing, because false is not equal to true, but let's get rid of this. let's have a default. Let's start writing some specs. So basically, we want to, when required, it has it should. Not a big fan of should. It allows to query a database. All right. So let's go with the spec, which is going to be, so basically we're going to inject a method to access the SQL connection. So the way you usually connect to SQL, it's you do something like this, and you do SQL dot connect, and then you pass your arguments in there. So you can pass SQLite, for example, and we're going to use SQLite for our test purpose, SQLite.db, but that could also be if you're connecting to Postgres, that's going to be Postgres, and then Postgres 5123, blah blah blah, your database, right? You see where I'm going. I assume you can also pass a hash with all the argument, like, I don't know, database, and then host. I don't know, for this you'll have to, I always use the URL because it's just much simpler. There's less things to types, and it's just one environment variable instead of 4 or 5. So yes, cool. And then you refer this as a DB like this, or DB like this, or a global variable if you want to. Yeah, it doesn't matter. But for our purpose in this test, we are going to, for this gem, we're going to go with DB. If somebody complains about that default not being sensible, well, then we can change it later. We're actually going to provide a way to configure it, but let's go with default settings being DB, and then go select 1.2a, which is the way that you actually force SQL to execute the database and return something, not to raise error. Let's run the test. And it complains because the DB is not, the method DB is not available, so let's just create it. So let's start in the spec helper. So the way it's going to work, so we're going to include a module into RSpec, right? And do something like config dot, well actually we can do this inline in the test. So let's do this in the before block. So we can do RSpec dot configure. Actually, do we want to do this? Yeah, RSpec dot configure. Do config. Okay, and then config.include, that's going to be, let's create specquel, and then there's going to be an API module where this actually is going to reside. So if we run the test, this doesn't exist, of course, we need to create this file. Let's create this into the lib folder, into the specquel.rb file. I'm not going to create a special, like an API.rb file. I think it's perfectly fine to do it in here. So create the module API, and then the defdb method. Oh, actually, before doing this, let's run the test with just this. Cool, so is happy about that. So let's create a db method, run the test. Cool, there's no such thing as select. Cool, yeah, because this returns nil, and we actually need to connect to SQL. So the way you connect to SQL, like I showed you before, it's going to be SQL.connect, very sensible API. I really like SQL for this simplicity. And let's go with SQL SQLite and test.db and run the test. All right. Uninitialized name SQL. Okay, so he's not happy because SQL doesn't exist. So let's require SQL. Okay. No such file to load SQL because we need to add this to our gem spec. Let's add it to the dependencies. SQL. Let's run bundle. All right, all done. Let's run the test again. So no such thing as SQLite 3. Haha. Well, same thing. We need to add this to our dependency, but this time it's not going to be a runtime dependency. It's going to be a development dependency. And run bundle install. Okay, all good. And okay. Oh, yes, because we need to require SQL 3, but we are going to require this in our specquel profile because we don't want to depend on SQL 3 in the main gem because that's not its purpose. But for testing purposes, SQLite 3, right? That should do. Ooh, what? Why is this? Okay, yes, because we do need to. I wonder if we do need to require bundler and then setup. Okay. Let's go back to the gem spec. Development. Oh, because it's not SQL, it's SQLite 3. Okay. Bundle install. Okay, this time that should do the trick. I think we don't need this anymore. Right, test working. Okay. Next, what do we need to do? What would be nice to do is that we just require the gem and that we don't need to add this thing manually. So let's remove this and remove the before block. Go back to the thing, and at the end, once it's been loaded, we need to require RSpec as well. Yes, I think that's isn't RSpec core or RSpec. What's in the spec for a spec hopper? Let's have a look at this. I'm not too sure exactly. There might be. Yeah, no. Let's have a look at GitHub. RSpec. RSpec core. And I believe there should be an RSpec. There's an RSpec core gem file. And if we go to lib RSpec, and it's going to be RSpec core. Okay. So I think what we need to do is do RSpec core. Actually, let's not require it, and let's run it. Yeah, it runs. It runs because there is because we're running it with RSpec. RSpec already exists, so I think it's not really necessary to do it because whoever's going to use that gem is going to have RSpec, and RSpec is basically always going to be loaded, I think. So let's keep it this way. If it doesn't work, then we can fix it later. If somebody's got a problem, I'm happy to help with it. Cool. So So that's pretty good so far. We've got this. We've got access to that DB method. What would be nice though is that we can actually configure this, because now this is not really dynamic and not everybody is gonna use this. So the way I think this is gonna work, we are going to configure the specquel gem using the configuration pattern, which is the same as RSpec and has many Ruby libraries. Configure, which will yield a configuration object. Right, and then we're going to do config, and then connection arguments, and pass in the SQLite stuff. Right, sounds good. And let's run the test now. And it fails. It says there's no such method as configure on the module. So let's create this. Let's create this method. No, that's not what I want to do. Yes, def configure. Okay. And then we're gonna yield a configuration object. So we will need a configuration object. Run the test now. It says there's no such thing as configuration arguments from nil class because config is nil, because we're not yielding anything in there. Yeah, we need to create a class to hold these configuration values. And let's create this class. So it's going to be configuration. This class is actually going to be a singleton method. I think it's good practice. You should probably only have one configuration object for all your libraries, like for your library. Unless maybe you want to do some crazy multi-threading or multi-process thing, which each instance has its own configuration. I don't know if that's a thing. I don't think anybody will ever have to do this. If they do, then they can just write their own library or hack like mine or make a pull request. So let's include singleton. Let's make this a singleton. Include singleton, right? Which also needs a require. Singleton. Okay, and right, so the way you access this singleton object is by doing configuration.instance, and this is how you access this instance. Let's run the test. Cool, and now we see that we do have a configuration instance. And we need to set a attribute accesses to hold this configuration, to save this configuration in memory. Cool. There you go. Done. And we need to actually use this method, and that's going to be connection arguments. And here we go. We have a configuration module, and we can configure our library with it, which is wonderful. One thing though is this needs to happen. Like, we can't figure this out for you. So if this isn't set, we're going to have to write an error message, right? Which is going to be descriptive enough. So let's write a test for that, and make sure that if we don't provide connection arguments, then it raises something. It raises an error with something descriptive, right? So context, and when the connection string, connection arguments. Let's actually do this. Connection arguments is not set. Then it raises a descriptive, a useful error. Error do. Okay. Let's actually wrap this into its own block, which is going to be when the is set. Okay, and symbol this correctly. Then let's copy this. It raises a descriptive error. Let's wrap this expected error description. It's going to be, let's make an eodoc end of string. End of string. Is it actually how you make a eodoc? What do I have in my notes? Where are my notes? Okay, yeah, that's how you do it. Okay, so let's explain. Okay, so specquel. Forgot a C, right? Yes. Specquel expects a configuration. Specquel. Whoopsie. My alarms. It's 9:30 where I am. Specquel configuration, not connection. Arguments to be set. Okay. Let's add a bit of space and say do please configure specquel this way. This way, cool. And we are just gonna provide an example the same way, the same as above, and that does the trick. Okay, so expect to this time to raise an error. Or actually, we don't even need to do this. Expect equal to raise an error. That's going to be an argument error, and the message is going to be the expected description. Let's run the test and see how this goes. Okay, so there's something funny going on, and it's an expected argument error with this, but it got something else. It got SQL database connect, yeah, okay, with either a hash or a string. Cool, so basically this is nil, so it's complaining about this not being happy. So what we need to do is do something along the lines of, let's do a begin block, and that's going to be our connection. Oh, actually, let's just say if this is nil, then so connection arguments is equal to this. Then we're going to raise, let's do this. if connection argument dot nil, or actually, so it's expecting a string or a hash. So if connection argument is neither a hash or a string, then raise actually no need for negatives. Now let's make this an unless. Raise argument error. And let's make, actually we can do this. Let's make this a constant, like no connection arguments error. Pass this here. Oh, and let's try to indent this correctly. Oof, it doesn't know how to indent this. I can just. So you'd be happy with this. I don't know, that's a bit weird. I think I've always seen here docs indented this way. Okay, let's go with this. Now let's pass this to our error, to our exception, and then you return this, which is good. Okay, let's call this at db. Let's cache this. Right, and that may be a little bit of a long line, so let's inline this. Okay, let me reindent the whole file. Cool. Yes, let's add an empty line. That's looking pretty good. Now we can actually reuse this here instead of in the that's going to be describe class, and then API, and then no connection error. Let's run the test, and this works wonderful. So let's run the whole test. Oh, so now the other one is failing. That's interesting. To not raise error, I don't know, expected was to be set. Oh, I know what's going on, because so if you just run one, it works. But if you run the two, but this one runs before, it will actually configure it. So what we need to do, there's a trick for this, and you need to reinitialize the singleton instance. So the way you do this, so if you use singleton in RSpec, like singleton classes in RSpec, you may have come across this. I think that's how it goes. So you got the example, and then here you do singleton underscore init, and then you pass the instance of the singleton class, the class that's singleton, and that's going to be configuration, and then you run the example dot run, and I think you re-init it after. That should solve the trick. Yes, it does, and we can We can run it several times, and you can see it works every time. So that's another nifty little trick that you're learning from Stupid Code Factory. Yeah, cool. So that's pretty good for now. And what is the next step? So the next step, because it's kind of usable, but it's not really usable in another way. I don't know if you understand me. Basically, because every project that uses a database, they'll have some kind of migrations to run, to define the schema, etc., add column, remove column, index, and all that stuff. So that's what we're going to do in the next part of this video. And so for today, that's going to be pretty much it. And I'll see you later, alligators.